There are some cases that horrify people, and then there are cases that change a country. On a cold Friday afternoon in February 1993, a 2-year-old boy vanished from a crowded shopping center in Bootle, England. Within hours, police were racing against time. Within days, Britain would be staring at one grainy CCTV image in disbelief. And when the truth finally emerged, it felt so impossible that even now, decades later, people still struggle to accept it. Because this was not just a story of a missing child, it was a story of how something unthinkable unfolded in public, in daylight, in front of witnesses, and still was not stopped. Before the trial, before the headlines, before the national anger, the legal battles, and the endless debate over justice. There was just a Friday afternoon, a mother at a butcher's counter, and a little boy who should have been safe. His name was James Bulger. Before he became a headline, James Bulger was just a little boy. He was 2 years old, blonde-haired, bright-eyed, and restless in the way toddlers are when the world still feels like something to chase. He was only weeks away from turning 3. He should have had birthdays, school photos, scraped knees, favorite cartoons, first-day nerves, teenage moods, and a future ordinary enough to be beautiful. Instead, his life stopped inside a shopping trip that began like any other. On 12th February 1993, James was with his mother, Denise, at the New Strand Shopping Centre in Bootle, Merseyside. It was busy, loud, the kind of everyday crowd where no one seems out of place. Denise later made one thing painfully clear. James was with her. He was holding her hand. She did not abandon him. She let go only for a moment while paying at the butcher's counter. And when she looked down, he was gone. That is the kind of sentence that drops into a family's life and changes everything. 1 second, a child is beside you. The next, the whole world has shifted. What Denise did not know then was that James had already been led away. And what investigators would later uncover about those first few minutes would make this case even more disturbing. The people who took James were not the kind of suspects anyone was imagining. CCTV captured 2 boys leading him out of the shopping center. One held his hand, another walked ahead. To anyone passing by, it may have looked almost normal. 3 children, 1 small, 2 older. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, no screaming crowd, no cinematic struggle. That ordinariness is part of what made the footage so haunting. Evil did not announce itself. It blended in with tiled floors, shop lights, carrier bags, and the noise of an ordinary Friday afternoon. As Denise searched in panic, more CCTV showed her moving through the center, looking for her son. Somewhere nearby, James was already being taken farther and farther away. The 2 boys would lead him on a journey of roughly 2.5 miles. That journey is one of the reasons this case still unsettles people so deeply. Because it did not happen in secrecy. It happened across streets, roads, and public spaces. People saw them. Some asked questions. Some were told that James was a younger brother. Others were told he was lost and being taken to a police station. Enough doubt, enough hesitation, enough normality to keep moving. And that is one of the hardest truths in this entire case. James was seen. Again and again, he was seen. But no one yet understood what they were really looking at. 38 witnesses would later help reconstruct his final journey. Once the alarm was raised, the first hope was the most fragile kind. Maybe he wandered off. Maybe someone found him. Maybe he was still nearby. Maybe there was still time. Police moved quickly through the shopping center, speaking to staff, searching exits, and reviewing security footage frame by frame. And then came the image that would burn itself into public memory. James walking away between 2 boys. It was grainy, distant, imperfect, but it was enough. Enough to know James had not simply wandered away. Enough to know he had been taken. Enough to send fear through an entire country. The image was released. People stared at television screens, newspapers, and still photographs, trying to decode what they were seeing. At first, many assumed the boys with James were older teenagers. That assumption mattered, because in the early stage of the investigation, police were searching in the wrong direction. Meanwhile, Denise waited, and waited. 2 days later, on February 14th, 1993, police found James's body near a railway line. The search was over, but the most shocking part of the case was only beginning. As police traced James's final movements, witness statements began stacking up like fragments of a nightmare. People had seen him with the 2 boys along the route. Some noticed James looked upset, some noticed he had been injured, some challenged the boys, but each witness saw only a moment, not the whole pattern. And without the whole pattern, even serious warning signs can feel uncertain in real time. That is what makes this case so psychologically disturbing. It was not hidden from the world, it was hidden inside the world. A crying child in public is not by itself proof of abduction. A shaky explanation is not by itself proof of murder. A strange moment is often dismissed as exactly that, a strange moment, and so the two boys kept moving, carrying a lie from one encounter to the next. For detectives, the challenge was not just to identify suspects, it was to turn scattered human memory into a sequence solid enough to survive in court. And then came a breakthrough, not from a confession, not from a dramatic chase, but from another camera. The original shopping center footage had created an image of the suspects, but not a clear one. Because of the poor quality, many people believed the boys were much older than they actually were. That misconception shaped the early search. Then investigators gained access to additional CCTV from a nearby business, Amex. And suddenly, the scale of the figures looked different, smaller, younger, not older teenagers, children. That realization changed everything. Detectives later said it shifted the direction of the investigation almost immediately. Assumptions collapsed. The case, which had been searching for one kind of offender, now had to confront another possibility entirely. Even the Ministry of Defense assisted in enhancing the original footage, showing just how urgent and extraordinary the case had become. Imagine that moment as an investigator. You have spent days hunting for predators in one direction. Then a clearer image arrives and the truth swings violently into focus. Not adults, not teenagers, children. And once detectives understood that, the entire case accelerated. Now the investigation moved with a different kind of momentum. Witness statements already placed James with the two boys. CCTV tracked parts of the route, but detectives still needed hard evidence, the kind that does not fade, panic, misremember, or bend under pressure. That is where forensics entered the story. A home office forensic scientist, Graham Jackson, matched blood from James to blood found on one boy's shoe. Another forensic scientist, Philip Rydaird, linked the bruising on James's cheek to the upper part of a shoe worn by the other boy. Quiet details, clinical details, but devastating ones. This is why the case became so overwhelming in court and in public memory. The truth did not rest on one dramatic reveal. It formed through accumulation, frame by frame, sighting by sighting, mark by mark, until the evidence was no longer pointing toward a possibility. It was pointing toward names: Robert Thompson, John Venables, both 10 years old at the time of the murder. That fact alone hit Britain like a second shockwave. Robert Thompson and John Venables were arrested on 18th of February 1993 at their homes in the Liverpool area. When the country learned the ages of the suspects, disbelief turned into something more complicated and more unsettling. Rage, yes, horror, obviously, but also confusion, a kind of moral disorientation. How do you process a crime this brutal when the people accused of it are themselves children? That question would define not only the trial, but decades of legal and social debate afterward. During the proceedings, the two boys were initially referred to as Child A and Child B. Even the courtroom language reflected the contradiction at the heart of the case. By age, they were children. By allegation, they stood accused of one of the most notorious child murders in modern British history. And yet, amid all of that shock, one thing could not be lost. James was still the center of this story. Not the psychology of the killers, not the spectacle of the trial, not the public outrage. James, a 2-year-old who had trusted the world the way children are supposed to. But the trial that followed would turn this tragedy into something even larger. A case that reshaped law, sentencing, and public opinion for years. The trial began at Preston Crown Court on November 1st, 1993. It lasted 3 weeks. On November 24th, the jury found both boys guilty of the abduction and murder of James Bulger. They were sentenced to detention during Her Majesty's pleasure, the mandatory sentence for young offenders convicted of murder. The trial judge, Mr. Justice Moreland, called the killing an act of unparalleled evil and barbarity. But the legal story did not stop there. Moreland recommended a minimum term of 8 years. The Lord Chief Justice advised 10. Then Home Secretary Michael Howard increased it to 15, citing public concern among other factors. That decision triggered years of legal challenges because the case had become bigger than one verdict. It had become a fight over who should decide punishment for juvenile offenders and how much public fury should influence justice. So even after conviction, the case kept evolving. Courtrooms were no longer only dealing with the crime itself. They were dealing with the aftershocks, and those aftershocks never really stopped. In 2001, both were released on life license and given new identities protected by lifetime anonymity orders. Courts later upheld those protections on the basis that revealing their identities would create an exceptional risk of serious harm or death. That decision was legally significant. Publicly, it was explosive. For many people, the case had already tested the limits of what they could understand. But anonymity introduced a new and deeply emotional question. What does justice look like when the people responsible disappear into new lives while the victim's family lives with permanent loss? Then, years later, one part of the case returned to the headlines. John Venables was recalled to prison in 2010 after child abuse. Images were found on his computer. He was later released again, then recalled once more in 2017 and jailed in 2018 for further child abuse image offenses. Robert Thompson is not publicly known to have reoffended after release. Those later developments reopened grief and outrage all over again, especially for James's family. What had once been remembered as a closed case became, once more, a living controversy. And that is why, more than 30 years later, Parliament was still debating James Bulger's case. For Denise Fergus, time did not erase anything. It only changed the shape of the pain. She has spoken about the empty chair at the dinner table where James should have sat, about telling his younger brothers who he was so that his memory would not be swallowed by the crime, about the questions that never leave a parent who loses a child. Who would he have become? Would he have married, had children, built a life? She also turned grief into action through the James Bulger Memorial Trust, supporting disadvantaged and bereaved families and victims of crime. And in doing that, she made sure James's name stood not only for tragedy, but for remembrance, compassion, and refusal to let the world move on too easily. Maybe that is why the CCTV image still lingers in public memory, not just because of what it shows, but because of what it does not. It does not show the life James should have lived. It does not show the birthdays he never reached. It does not show the man he never got to become. It shows only a child walking away. And the rest, we are left to imagine. So when people remember the murder of James Bulger, they are not only remembering a crime that shocked Britain, they are remembering a little boy, a family that never stopped grieving, a justice system pushed to its limits, and a case that still asks painful questions about responsibility, punishment, and whether justice can ever truly feel complete. If you share your thoughts below, please keep them respectful and centered on James and his family. If one part of this case stayed with you most, the CCTV breakthrough, the witness trail, or the way the case continued shaping public debate for decades, let me know in the comments. And if you want more true crime told with care, context, and respect for victims over spectacle, subscribe and turn on notifications, because stories like this should never be reduced to shock alone.